Cuchulain wasn't listening. He wasn't even there for his woman, Laine thought, but she guessed she wasn't his woman. He hadn't made it official yet. Cuchulain was watching the drunken escapade of Sethlin, trying to punch his fist through every standing stone. In the Cattle Raid of Cooley story, Sethlin had mistaken the stone for an Ulsterman. That was part of Maka's curse. But to Laine, it reminded her of one of the Logger Day events back in her hometown, a festival where men did stunts with logs to celebrate the old days of logging. And the drunkenness abound. It was a different kind of strength to be strong like a woman, she thought, but definitely not any less. It would make all the difference in the long run, no matter how bad it felt right in that moment. "There you go, you'll probably get him next time," Cuchulain said. Sethlin's face was all red and blotchy as he went to punch the stone again, and he looked up like he was about to pass out. "Dummy," Cuchulain cried, shaking his head when he turned to make eye contact with Laine. "He's that drunk, then?" Laine asked. "He can't even tell a standing stone from a real person? That's kind of sad." It reminded her of when her cousins drew on Dad's face with makeup because he was passed out drunk. His head kept bobbing on the chair. They were all sitting in the living room at Grandpa's cabin. It looked like he had melted into a woman by the time they had finished with him. She knew now that it was only innocent children's games, and that no matter how imperfect Dad was, he was still around, at least part of the time. It made her forgive any past grievances she held for her cousins. "Look at him! He doesn't get it," Cuchulain said. "I tell you, the Ulstermen are all useless as a bunch of little girls in battle," he said. "Hey, fighting like a girl is a compliment," Laine said. "So you think you can fight, then?" Cuchulain asked. But she was actually trying to think about how she could help these Ulstermen. How could she be a teacher and help inspire what was sometimes called the lost generation? Laine knew the part of her that was Morgan could fight. That determination was in her blood. She was resilient, wholesome, and stoic. But for her, fighting was just continuing to do what she'd always done, in a world that said she couldn't, she shouldn't, or why even bother. Yet she still believed there was still so much goodness she could offer the world. And she would try not to fall into weariness and stay driven towards her purpose. Laziness was for the upper class. She needed a job, she needed her creativity, and she needed to keep going. Her brother seemed to know she was strong, or he wouldn't have done what he'd done. He wanted her to remember only the good things about him, which wasn't hard. There were so many. The hills seemed to grow and even get steep. Someone offered to help. "No thanks," she said. She was doing it on her own. She started climbing the wall of Mom's house, her childhood home. Was she still dreaming? There was a hard part to get over, where she had to do a chin-up. It seemed beyond her capability, but she did it, and she reached to the next level. Then she was just climbing effortlessly. It was so smooth. Her movement was succinct, and people were watching. It felt really good and empowering. She looked back down at the newspaper and finished reading her horoscope. "You are being recognized for your talents or creativity. A sign of good luck in business," it said. Compared to the landscape at Morgan's cottage, the trees were denser here, where the men were dragging out their resentments from high school, knotty with roots, like it wouldn't budge, and she could see how much she'd outgrown who she used to be. She readjusted her hair clip, which was no more than a smooth branch she'd whittled with a knife. She could see the top of Cuchulain's dyed head black with the blonde roots, and Selhern with his thick brown hair, and what looked like sort of a monk cut, though he wore a hat of antlers like a Viking berserker. They were trying to outstage each other to get her attention, but she was the one up on high. She started hiking in the mountains like she was back in Montana, and they followed her. She was sitting somewhere beautiful when they found her, and they all seemed to grow very happy. The king was the most powerful player on the chessboard, but he could not survive without the queen. Se sono in trance non bevono, Laine said. What? He asked. In a trance they won't drink. And she pretended she was a hypnotist. She was talking about the Ulstermen who were under Maka's curse, unable to fight. It was an earlier tale that was supposed to explain why all the men of Ulster were unable to fight Maeve's army. She could see why. There were ads everywhere. Sunshine in a Sip. Promoters made all that stuff seem like a fun pop song. She didn't have to follow the curse. She didn't have to follow all the family traditions. She could not change the men she loved. She could only become who she wanted to be. That's where her power was. Fire will put him in a trance, and flood will placate his craving. He doesn't know the first thing about fighting, and neither do you, Cuchulain said. But she knew about steadiness. Sethlin stopped trying to punch the rock, who he thought was the enemy. Both Sethlin and Cuchulain were looking at her and waiting. A person's bravery had the ability to win over other people's hearts, man or woman. Providing her with the example given to her by her mom and grandmother, she knew it wasn't because someone was wearing pants that made them the leader. It was because someone had wisdom. Then we'll have to teach her, and we'll teach her good, Sethlin said. It was like they found camaraderie now and leaving her out. Everyone knows you can fight, but it's about having some long-term strategy, Laine said. There are things I can teach you also, you know. She surprised herself when she started talking Italian, and her environment seemed to match it. Sono molto agile, pensai. It meant she was quick and nimble. Pensate che io non capisca. Io capisco tutto. Do you think I don't understand? I understand everything.